Hello, I'm Keith Reynolds, and this is Marketplace, Sales, Marketing, and Rock and Roll. And welcome to our LinkedIn live stream here. I'm going to be joined by Tom.
Hey,
Welcome, Tom Dempsey.
thank you. As always, Keith, great to work side by side with you. This will, as always, be a lot of fun.
We always dive into the depths of sales and marketing and finish off with a dose of rock and roll. And we do this as a way to promote our podcast studio and podcast ecosystem. And that's turning this recording into just a ton of content. And you'll see that on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and anywhere we want to put this, but it's formatted in an omni-channel way so we can push it out on any channel. And with the advertisement over, Drew, welcome.
Hey, great to be here, guys. How are you doing?
Good. This is
All
Drew
right.
Neisser.
Drew Neisser.
That's
and I want to know the Penguin in Chief, where that came from.
Easy answer, but it's going to take me like 2 minutes and a good story. So we started CMO Huddles in 2020. It's a group of CMOs that come together to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. Cut to summer of 2023. My wife and I are in the Galapagos. We're swimming, snorkeling. There's a bunch of penguins around, which is cool. The Galapagos penguins are kind of cool. We get back on the ship and we learn that evening that a group of penguins is a huddle. Boom, light bulb went off. I literally from the ship sent a note to the person who did our logo and said, find a way to get penguins in there. And from there, we've worked our way to some fabulous penguin stress balls, hats, and of course, my penguin hat, which comes out at certain occasions.
So I brought this. My girlfriend and I went up to Wyoming to the hot springs, and she bought me a little bit of candy called penguin poop.
Well, isn't that special? Yeah.
So, well, welcome. Tell us a little bit about the journey to get to CMO Huddles, because you've got quite a deep roots in marketing and some of the biggest brands around. Tell us how you got it.
Make this as tight as possible. So founded Renegade in 1993 as an alternative to gray advertising at the time. Just had been worked at big agencies and really wanted to do something different, always attracted sort of the guerrilla marketing world. Over the course of time, we worked with a bunch of interesting clients. One of them happened to have a gentleman by the name of Pete Kranick, who started this group called the CMO Club. And he said to me, hey, Drew, can you help me get this started? And we did their logo and their first website. And it was through the CMO Club that I started interviewing CMOs. Fast forward to today, I've interviewed over 600 CMOs and have kind of become an expert on that role. But during the club years, for 12 years, I was interviewing the CMOs who were in the club. I was writing articles. I wrote 2 books. I found a podcast. We're about to launch episode 400. And when my friend Pete sold the club March 2nd, 2020, right before the pandemic, brilliant move. He sold it to Salesforce. The light bulbs went off in my mind in that with the pandemic and with Salesforce, that was going to kind of kill the club. There was an opportunity for something different and use the expertise that I built up from all these interviews. So I got 20 CMOs together April 1st for a virtual hangout, and 55 meetings later, they said, this is a business idea. You got to do it. Here's how to, here's basically they laid out the entire program for me. And we just had our 4th anniversary and we have several hundred members, and it's the most gratifying work of my career. And to bring it back one more thing to the Penguins, 1% of our revenue is donated to the Global Penguin Society.
Nice.
That's great.
So this is really a customer-driven product that you've developed. If you had that many
Yeah.
meetings, and then they defined it for you.
Yeah. And, we have a very active advisory board, and our small team try to apply all the stuff that we learn from the marketers, and vice versa. So there's just this wonderful ecosystem of sharing, testing, seeing the results. And one of the interesting things about huddles, and this is going to come out harsher than it is, but as someone who has a little bit of gray hair, I can do this, which is, I'm really not interested in your opinion. I'm interested in your experience. And so when we focus on experiences of what worked and what hasn't, we really get to a point where we can, as I like to say, share, care, and dare each other to greatness.
So you're really pushing each other to excel.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the goal here. I mean, B2B is not necessarily famous for innovative marketing. It's not famous for necessarily CMOs being the drivers of the organization, but the folks that I'm working with are really making a difference. And so we, but they still are alone in their organization. Very few CEOs have any marketing experience. Obviously, CFOs don't. Head of sales rarely do, other than they know the absence of marketing. So they're alone, and they need a peer group. And it's really crazy today to try to go it alone.
So during those 55 meetings from beginning to end, that blows me away. What was discussed in terms of creating something unique and sustainable for marketing professionals?
Well, it's funny. The primary discussion was about these moments in time. If you remember, April 1st, COVID had hit, everybody had gone home, everyone was learning, how do I manage a remote team? What do the meetings look like? Most people hadn't even adopted Zoom. We were lucky in that we had been using Zoom for a couple of years. And there were all these issues. And then you got to, so it was work from home. And then it was, well, how do we handle COVID testing? How do we deal? And then it was Black Lives Matter. There were all these, and I would call them crises that needed to be covered. In between that, as we kept having these meetings, and it's funny. So I just came off a live streaming show, and one of the CMOs that was in our founding group was on the show, and we remember it was so intense because everybody was in territory that they hadn't been before.
Mm.
And so they're trying to figure out lanes. And every once in a while you would hear how one company was helping another company or all their customers. Like I remember CMO said, the execs all got on the phone and said, how are you doing personally and professionally? How can we help you? And so there was just a really core sense of together we can get through an incredibly difficult, complicated period of time, and together we can solve each other's problems. And that's the funny thing about this is if I give you my problems, you got them easily, right? You can solve them in a heartbeat right? But if you just try to do it on your own, you kind of go around in circles and second guess yourself. So you need a peer group. You need a sort of your own board. And that's what Huddles did. And that was clear during the process. And we just made it, built it into the program. It's like, I always ask our team.
I've been following you for a while as on LinkedIn, and we've been exchanging ideas. But I think one of the most impactful things I've seen out of your Huddles work was the discussion about the second year. And first you described everyone talks about the first 90 days in the first year, but set up the second year with how difficult the first year is, and then the thanks that you get in year two.
Yeah. So 8 weeks ago, I started a program on LinkedIn as a test, as an experiment to see what would happen if I wrote a really deep thought leadership piece on something that was a nerve in the industry and based on a real quote of a conversation that I had with one or more CMOs. And so I started that 8 weeks ago. And much to our surprise, because my team sort of helps in some of this, not in the writing. And by the way, I don't use any generative AI. I don't even allow Grammarly on it. But I do use generative AI for the images. Anyway, the point of the story is all of the posts have essentially gone viral, but 2 of them have had over 100,000 engagements. It's like, holy camole. And again, everything that I'm doing is trying to think about, okay, so obviously we hit a nerve. That's really good. That's helped CMO huddles and gain it. But what's interesting here is I think there's an opportunity for CMOs to bring this program to their CEOs and kind of secure their job for a lot longer. Because if you can make your CEO a hero or a voice in the industry, you have a lifetime friend.
So let's walk through the highlights of your first year. You hit it out of the park. Describe the things that you really nailed in year 1, and then let's look at year 2.
Oh, you mean for CMO huddles?
Yeah. Well, no, just as a new
CMO.
CMO.
Right. So,
go ahead.
Yeah, here's the thing. I can put this in 2 buckets. One is where I see it gone wrong, and one where I see it really work. So you have this. If you think about the world as this short-term thing, you've got 30, 60, 90 days. Most of them are going in with a 30, as if you could radically change the trajectory of the business in 90 days. But think of this as, I don't care how big the business is, an aircraft carrier, because we did a video game on this 100 years ago, takes 5 miles to come to a stop. Right. And turning that thing is just a forever process. So the larger the organization, the harder it is to change. However, no one is saying, hey, take your time. So a successful 30, 60, 90 is figuring out exactly the quick wins that you can do that will buy you the credibility and the time that you need to make the big changes. And the big changes are, is our go-to-market strategy right? Are we targeting the right people? Is our positioning right? Is our personality right? Are we targeting the right persona? All those big things, which if you rush into it, you are just going to make superficial decisions. And so you really need to talk to customers. You really need to talk to employees. And the other problem is, and I see this all the time, and particularly when we were doing branding at Renegade, is there's this rush that just leads to something that doesn't have any depth and often gets rejected by employees. And if employees don't buy a new brand, for example, or a new message, you lose.
Right.
So anyway, the 30, 60, 90 is all about, first is quick wins, quick fixes, things that show, oh, you're pretty smart. Wow. You put an 800 number on the website. Wow. Good job. Whatever it is. And we have a long list of those that we share with our community of quick wins and sources of quick wins. So you can buy the time to make the big strategic initiatives. I mentioned the show that we just did an hour ago. It was on customer advocacy. Well, it turns out if you're an enterprise, it takes a long time to build customer advocates. And so on the show, that one of the CMOs talked about, you got to do a road show, and then you get to know them on the road show, and then you let them speak at the road show, and then maybe you'll let them speak at a conference, and the next thing you know, they're an advocate and featured on your website. That could take 9 months or a year, but that's huge.
So what caught my attention was then the thinking that you put out in your article on year 2. Like, oh my gosh, we got through year 1. Where's the thanks? I go right back to work, and it's a different agenda.
It is. It's so hard, and I'm really hoping that part of that there's a little break that the CMO, when they take the new job and they've managed the expectations with the CEO, they say in their initial contract, at the end of 1 year, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about all they're going to accomplish, and then I'm going to say goodbye for 2 weeks. And they're going to, but what happens that if that doesn't happen, you just see this exhaustion, and you don't get to celebrate what happened, and you're just exhausted. And then you kind of, okay, here we go again. And it's no wonder that often there's a little bit of a second year blues.
Mm.
So
So, with,
go ahead,
sorry.
Tom.
Oh, with Renegade, you said that after 30 years or so, that you've stopped it as an agency and morphed it into a media brand in and of itself. What does that look like? How did that transition?
You know, this is where I could use some outside brand help, and someone who's done brand for a long time. So imagine you have, when we started Huddles, we had Renegade, was still an agency. We had Renegade Marketing, my book. We had a podcast called Renegade Marketers Unite. And the podcast and everything supported the Renegade business. Then we start CMO Huddles, and then we create CMO Huddles Studio. And we've got these competing brands, and if you will. And so Renegade, for the time being, and it's now Renegade Marketing, because renegade.com is for sale. Renegade Marketing is a media brand that gives exposure to the huddlers, as we call them, the CMOs. So if you think about the value prop for CMO Huddles, it's confidence, as in you get information on a timely basis that you can use to make faster, smarter decisions. It's the colleagues that you built that are going to help you today and throughout your career. And then it's the coverage. And that's probably our secret sauce, is we guarantee that you will get a certain amount of coverage. You get to be on CMO Huddle Studios. Those become Renegade Marketers Unite episodes. You get to all sorts of ways that we help expose your brand. So Renegade serves a role as the coverage, if you will. But it's, I mean, if somebody came in and looked at it and said, well, why do you have two brands? and the truth is, I think we do need the Renegade Marketing brand as another vehicle, as our own vehicle to support the community. And it's been around so long. I mean, we've done that podcast for 7-8 years.
Yeah.
So it's a little tricky, but it seems to work.
Yep.
You said you started Renegade as an alternative to an agency. And I kind of hear that you went beyond advertising to more of an integrated marketing and media approach. Tell us about that journey and how you go from an ad man to this integrated approach that you have.
Well, I back in my days at J. Walter Thompson, I was even working on packaged goods. I was the guy who would come up with 100 different ways that you could market Listerine that didn't involve selling it as a mouthwash. I mean, it just was, or Lubriderm. We got them involved in women's pro skiing and sampling. And so I had a mindset that, well, one, an account guy could do more than just, help get the creative sold and produced. And so when I got to Shy at Day, and I actually worked for a promotion division of theirs, and then they closed that and I ended up working in a regular thing. So I go to Dentsu finally to say, can we just do something different? And fortunately for me, they wanted to get some business from Panasonic, and they needed another agency, if you will, that could do it. And I said, fine, as long as we don't just do advertising, because we don't need another advertising agency. They said, fine, we don't care, get business. So Panasonic was the beginning of that journey. And so we did the thing called the Panasonic Traffic Cam. We wrapped buses. We did, all sorts of guerrilla marketing efforts. And then we ended up building their first website. So, and then we ended up launching the Tough Book for the personal computer division. So we just found different ways, and we named it, and then we did crazy guerrilla marketing stuff, like showing that it was impossible to kill a Tough Book. And we ran a 6-ton Hummer over a brand new prototype of a laptop computer on live television. So we kind of had the roots in guerrilla. And then we had a recession and nobody wanted to spend money on guerrilla. So we pivoted, frankly.
Sure.
And, we pivoted, I think, to maybe social, and then from social to content, and then from content to brand, because I wanted to get closer to the strategy. But really last year, by the end of last year, I decided that after 30 years of running an agency, that I'd rather run a community of marketers.
Mm.
And
that sounds a lot more fulfilling.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Instead of helping one or two or three clients, it can really engage and hopefully make a difference in a lot of CMOs' lives.
So this is the point at which we kind of transition over. Boom! This is the rock and roll part of the show.
Bring it.
Everybody wants to know who your favorite band is, what your concert story is. Where's your on ramp to rock and roll?
Okay. Well, let's start. So I don't know how old your guys are, but I had grandparents who lived in the Chicago area, and I was from California, and they took me to concerts when I was kind of little. So actually my first concert was either Dionne Warwick or the Loving Spoonful.
Okay.
And I remember both concerts, and I remember my grandfather calling Dionne Warwick, Dionne Wedgwood. It was his way of remembering her name. So anyway, that was, gosh, very, very young. In terms of favorite band, this will crack you up. My favorite band is Boston. And which just is sort of a funny thing, you know. I actually had an 8-track cassette of their first album, which I wore out. It pretty much wore out the second album, and then I ended up buying the album too, just to have them. But I didn't see Boston until, oh my gosh, 2014 or 2015, and I saw Boston in Chicago, okay, which is really crazy. But I want to tell you a little bit of the story on this, because you will laugh at this. I think not that story, but about 20 years ago, my wife and I decided, because she loves music and we love going to concerts, that we were going to do a tour that we're going to call See Them Before They Die Tour. Now, what we didn't realize is that, so we started seeing these folks, and you can name the brand. We saw Cream, we saw Toto and Yes, we saw Steely Dan. You know, you just list every 70s, 80s band, Steve Miller, John Fogerty, Hall & Oates, all of them. Well, and we had put Prince on there, not knowing. And then what happened is, like, we'd see them, and then one of the band members would die. So, like, you know, we saw Prince, he died. We saw Yes, the lead singer died. And so of course, by the time we saw Boston, their lead singer had already died. By the time we saw Journey, they had a replacement lead singer. But the funniest, one of the most fun experiences was we went to see Cher with our daughter, who bought the tickets, because our daughter had a girlfriend from like 5 years old who identified with Cher and just thought she was the funniest, amazing thing. So that was pretty cool. And I'll say one other story that involves our kids. We took our kids to see NSYNC at Jones Beach, whenever NSYNC was still touring, way back when. And my son got into the parking lot and said, "I don't want to go." And we're there at Jones Beach. And so anyway, he said, "Look, why don't you go? You can put some tissue to we'll leave if we have to." So he made it through it. So anyway,
same story as a father.
Right. It's amazing. But so now that we've gone through, like, we saw the Rolling Stones, and we had tickets to see Aretha, and she died before we got to see her, which was terribly sad. Now we have a different list, which is the See Them Before We Die. So yes.
Well, your favorite band, Boston, is near and dear to the hearts of Keith and I, since, as we've mentioned before, just purely by coincidence, that was our first concert back in 1978 in 2 different locations.
Yeah.
And I saw them here in Denver, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and they sounded great, Tom Schultz and crew. But it just dawned on me, 40 years had passed.
Right.
Or nearly 40 years, over 40 years.
And the lead singer died.
Yeah, Bradley does.
Like 15, but you know, they have a wonderful replacement if you close your ears. The same thing with Journey, by the way.
Journey,
Oh my God.
yeah. Although I heard he didn't stay on the tour. He like was not.
Well, I mean, he did for at least 7 years.
Yeah.
I don't, maybe he's off
Or maybe
now.
they have yet a third one.
Right. I mean, the fact that this guy was a Filipino.
Yes.
Did you see that documentary on it? Because it's great.
No.
There's a documentary on how they found him, how he got it, and how he actually changed the band. Because this guy was such a enthusiastic performer, and Journey band was like laid back, play the guitar, wear the thing, and leave the stage.
And he brought the energy back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I thought I had heard that didn't work out. I'm going to have to go check that down.
No, it was, and again, the guy was incredible.
Yeah.
His voice was so good.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
Well, Neil Schon, that's a hard, tough act to follow.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we saw like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and that was hard, really hard. I mean, Nash still sounds great, and we saw him separately in concert in a small place, City Winery. But and Crosby's died, hasn't he? But Crosby just couldn't carry a note. He just couldn't carry a note tune anymore. Great guitar, couldn't carry a note.
I'm worried about that. I'm seeing Bob Dylan this summer up in the Gorge.
Well, the good news is he never had a good voice. So,
I'm excited because it's Billy Strings is playing with him.
Oh, amazing! Yeah.
And so,
and I think that's a big part of it. The ones who really get it, like I saw Jackson Browne, and he had some great new musicians and backup singers that would sort of fill in. So when he was singing Running on Empty, he didn't sound like he was on empty, right?
Yeah. Well, I have a question and a follow-up question. That first question is, when do you wear the penguin hat? And the follow-up is do you wear it in Cameron Arena?
Do I wear it where?
In Cameron Arena.
Oh, gosh. Well, the answer to that is no, because I honestly have not been back to a basketball game in Cameron, embarrassingly, since I graduated. However, I will wear the penguin hat whenever asked, and you didn't ask, but I wear it, and here's why. I wear it when we do our Tuesday tips and when we do our Wednesday wisdom videos. And all I'm trying to do is just lighten up B2B and saying we can have a little fun, we can be a little wacky, and we can still be on brand, right? Because our brand is all about penguins and huddling. So I have fun with it. And by the way, I don't know if you've ever seen this.
Oh, that's great.
No. Well, we had Danielle Hughes and Kevin Perlmutter on recently, and they're both branding people. And they both alluded to B2B, especially in this era of personal branding and media, where you're putting yourself out there. You can't just talk feeds and speeds. You have to represent something a lot more than that today.
Yeah, it's so true. And while I'm not a person who's going to say, oh, it's all about human to human, because it's complicated in B2B, because you often have 10, 12, 14 buyers. It's a long buying decision. There are rational components, but ultimately trust is an irrational notion. And that's the part you have to remember, is that it's built up over time. And you ask someone, why do you like that product? They'll say, I don't know, I just do. If you dig, you'll find out, oh, well, they may give you the speeds and feeds answer, but chances are in B2B, they might say, because, ultimately this made me much better at my job, or I was able to succeed on an individual level, or help my company, or because I didn't screw anything up, which is why so many decisions don't get made, right? I don't look and this is why software companies often don't get sold. They don't lose to another company. They lose to someone saying, I'm not going to buy this, because if I do, I'm sticking my neck out. So, and all of that is, these are you could say rational, but they're really irrational decisions. You're going to make a decision to keep the company on an old technology because you don't want to be the agent of change, because that's a risk. But so you have to help people over the hump, and you do that by building relationships and building a brand, and not necessarily wearing a penguin hat, but
If the shoe fits.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. When I first started shifting from more event marketing to actually learning that I was a writer, the fellow that I wrote for would develop a communication strategy with the company, and it was what we're doing now. We talk about the North Star, but what is that one thing to help me do my job better, right? Or in the end, we're going to spend less, because that one thing can be passed along in the decision-making meeting. And if you have too many things, you're nothing to anybody.
Yeah, it's so well put. And it's interesting because we did a bonus huddle yesterday with Allison Letary, who's got a wonderful book called The Stand Out Startup. And it's all about positioning and getting a really tight definition. And as she was talking, I was thinking about the famous story of, the blind folks touching a different part of the elephant, right? One touches the tail, one touches the foot, one touches the nose, and they have no idea what this thing is. And that's exactly what happens when you have, hey, I'm just going to say this about our brand to the CFO, and I'm going to say this to the brand about the CEO. They get in a room, and there's been research on this. I think Gartner did the research. You lose the deal. Whereas if they all have a common understanding of thread, you're 2.2 times more likely to win. So yeah, there's another little interesting thought in here that that seems to be resonating with folks right now, which is this notion of speed to hero. Because given the marketplace, it's very difficult, again, because you don't want to take a risk and because nobody wants to spend money. So if you understand that by selling your product or service in B2B to somebody, the speed at which they will start to look better than they do, as in speed to hero, is critical. And if you can show them that for the organization, it's like an ROI calculator, but it's for, it's sort of, we'll call it emotional return as opposed to capital return.
Interesting. And it ties back to that, particularly if you have a solution for somebody that's just getting started in their position, where we started out the conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
We are very grateful that you're spent time with us today and shared your thoughts about being a CMO and about the way you care for CMOs and your huddle. And thank you so much.
Thank you guys for doing this. I know it's a lot of work. I really appreciate it. And you make it very easy to be a guest. So thank you.
Well, we want to make Publio Studio the Genius Bar of podcasting. and our secret sauce is in not helping you get 1 million downloads. I'm not looking for 1 million downloads on this. I'm looking for the few people that are going to help us make our numbers this year, right? And so that's what we want to do with our customers' podcast, is turn it into information quickly and get it out there to the 50 or 500 or 5,000 people that are in your target market.
Smart strategy, folks. Really smart strategy. Narrow the audience, create some piece of content, cut it, slice it up, get it out to those few people, and then take really good care of the ones that you win.
Right.
By the way, the bar thing in the background that you both have, yeah.
So we got to tell you the story about this. We met in February of 23. By August, we had the idea, and we were going to do it in Tom's basement. Now,
Wayne's World.
He has a basement to brag about. And you go down, and behind the Big Lebowski picture, you move it and you do a dial pad, and the bookshelf opens up, and you go into the rock and roll room. It's like a safe room that has guitars and a bass, and the bar is the taken out as a bench from Red Rocks.
Oh my gosh.
It's the deal. Okay.
Wow.
So we're bringing the rock and roll to the sales and marketing out of that experience.
Oh my God, it makes me wish I had. By the way, there is a closet behind this thing that's because I just, but it's not what you're describing. And I share what's funny, the first 50 episodes of CMO Huddle Studios, we actually did a gin tasting on it because I thought that would be fun. But we ended up killing that. It was fun. We killed it because we were taping shows at 11 in the morning and it would be 8 a.m. on the West Coast. And no CMO wants to be seen sipping gin at as fun as it was. So sadly, we had to say goodbye to that.
Yeah. Well, as wet as we get is on the wall behind us.
Yeah. Sales, marketing, rock and roll, and sometimes bourbon.
And sometimes bourbon. All right. Well, there is a gin, by the way, that tastes like bourbon, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Old Tom. It's a Bar Hill. Old Tom. Yeah. Bar Hill Old Tom. Check it out. It's a brown gin. And it's barrel aged. Yeah.
And do you mix it like you would in a whiskey like drink?
I would drink it neat the same way you would a whiskey, a good whiskey. Maybe if you want to put a big ice cube in it, you can. You want it cold. That's other than that. My wife likes it with muddled mint, like heavily muddled mint.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it interesting, there's a touch of honey in the gin. So it takes a little bit of whatever alcohol beer, and then the barrel aging just gives it a very almost bourbon-like experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A little fuller on the palate.
Yeah.
You're making me thirsty, Drew.
I know. It's not 5 o'clock.
Let us know when you're out in Denver.
Okay.
And we'll treat you to a nice evening.
I got to see the basement.
Oh yeah.
It's worth the trip.
All right.
Well, Drew,
on our list of bands to see, besides before we die, we've got Adele, Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift, and Beyonce. So, get us tickets in Denver. We'll be there.
All right.
I don't know if we have enough money for tickets.
I know.
Taylor
Yeah,
Swift.
exactly. It was a big ask.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon on LinkedIn, and thank you everybody for joining us. And I look forward to turning this into some content and sharing that with you, Drew.
All right, gents. Thank you so much.
Great to talk to you.
Bye.
Be well.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.